Hey everyone, welcome to the Open Sketchbook podcast, episode 1. This is our first episode ever, and I am so excited to introduce our guest, artist, author, educator Juliette Aristides. Juliette's work has had a profound impact on me as an artist. Her first book, Classical Drawing Atelier, is what put me on my path. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I think you will too. Thanks for being here. Let's get to it. All right, great. Hi, Juliette.
Hey, Evan.
Man, I'm so happy to talk to you. We had talked a little bit through email and our phone call earlier, but your first book changed my life completely. And I vividly remember discovering it in Barnes and Noble randomly in the art section. And that's when the art section was really kind of poor. And your book was, front facing, not side facing. And I saw the Proudhon on the cover. It was the drawing book, and that thing became like a Bible to me for the next 3 years of my undergrad. So I feel like I'm meeting a rock star right now.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So what led you to that process of writing that first book? Because you've gone on and written, I think you're on your seventh book now.
Yeah, exactly. I've gone on to do seven. Yeah, it's a lot of books.
That's
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, that book, it was interesting because when I pitched that book, there wasn't, I actually had been doing books for my classes, small books just for the hell of it. And I still, I've done that off and on over the years. Like, let's put all this stuff together. And so someone introduced me to a person at Watson Guptill at the time that was in St. Mark's Square over in Manhattan. And at the time, it was looked at as being very niche. There wasn't any guarantee that it would be more interesting to anyone besides two or three people who happened to be in that art movement at the same time. And this is pre-internet and pre-comeback of ateliers or of even figurative art. And also, you weren't seeing this sort of tandem interest in, animation, which could, you could prop figurative art up with interest in animation studios and whatnot. The idea behind it was that no one was sure that this stuff would last. And at one point, it was kind of teetering. Actually, the most likely outcome would that be that it faded into oblivion. The least likely outcome was that it would take off and do so well. Not necessarily the book per se, but the art movement in general. And nobody at that time kind of fell into it. There's no internet, so you're not going to get a recommended search, link or anything. So you had to be looking for it. It wasn't going to come find you most of the time. So the idea of the books initially was, one, make a compelling kind of philosophical case of why this isn't just creating pictures that look like things that have been done before, or for propping up history of Western art as it is. So what other compelling philosophical currents are at work that would make that relevant to recording what we have compiled so far, so that if it did kind of peter out entirely, there would at least be some record of it from the stuff that I spent 10 years bumming around trying to find pieces. So it was a record of my work. And then lastly, a way to bring together all these strands of people who were making work like this at the time, who were each kind of siloed in their own particular spots and almost had a kind of church fraction attitude towards one another, like why their particular brand of it was better than another. So I felt like it was a way to make friends in that group as well. So that's a threefold kind of motivation.
Totally. It makes so much sense. Just to clarify, for the movement that you're speaking of, that's the Atelier movement, right?
It was the atelier movement at the time, but you could also enlarge it to see others that were working within the figurative tradition that weren't per se atelier, specific. So not everybody, and not everybody wanted to be in. Not everyone wanted to be associated with work from ateliers. So it was like, for example, Andrew Wyeth's work is in there, and his son, neither of which trained within there, the Atelier Anagoni per se, and others. Yeah, I'd say that would be there. There's a few more reasons as well. I guess I'll just earmark one more. Is that at that time there was still art magazines that kind of were important to people, I'd say, and they really showed very little discernment. So you'd see work, like beautiful work that was being done by people who, you'd see a gorgeous Jacob Collins painting, and you'd flip the page and there'd be ways that you could hot glue gun, elbow macaroni to a paper plate. And so
Right.
whether or not anybody read the book, I just kind of wanted to firmly cement that what people were trying to do was not just reviving a craft, it was reviving something bigger aesthetically.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an amazing undertaking. That's not a small thing, and the scope of artists in that book are phenomenal. I mean, it's just like you're saying, it's I think about all the people that I discovered through that book, not only classical artists like Proudhon, but contemporary artists who I would later study with, like Stephen Assail, Michael Grimaldi, Dan Thompson, and all these people that I just had no idea were making art. And I know those magazines that you were mentioning, and I felt frustrated with them for the exact reason that you just laid out.
Yeah, yeah, they're just ridiculous. They were embarrassing. They were. We had to reconnect the timeline in a way that felt like it more accurately reflected the aims of the people working, in it. So.
Totally. You said that you had bounced around for like 10 years trying to sort of gather all the information and build your education and find these little nooks and crannies because there was no way to look it up. So what was that like?
Yeah, what was that like? It was there was more than one experience of showing up at a place where with nowhere to live and my portfolio case and my sleeping bag.
Wow.
And so it all felt a little bit blind, and I felt always like the slowest of the slow. I don't believe, in looking back, I don't know if there was any natural talent there whatsoever. I'm not sure. There was a deep love and interest. I think today people get good so fast, but it took me every minute of those 10 years. I mean, no summers off, working really, really hard to understand it. In a way, I don't regret it because I feel like I know it. Like each decision I've made as far as education goes or what I've gained has been wrestled with, and I didn't inherit it exactly. I've had to integrate it. So I feel like, in a way, when things were harder, there was a particular advantage for those of us like yourself who, where the path wasn't clear, because you know why you are where you are. And when you're hitting bottom or you're off on a sidetrack, you have a fair amount of resources to kind of get yourself back on again.
Yeah, I it's really wild to think of all that because I remember when I was in school, once I sort of decided to follow this little thread of all the options, because I went to my undergrad for illustration. Um, but I didn't find it fulfilling. I found drawing the figure in the life room to be way more exciting than any of my illustration assignments or anything like that. Something like the game of figure drawing to me is just like never ending. It's inexhaustible.
Yeah, it's chess. It's like a chess game. You're given the same
Yeah,
rules, and now what are you going to do each time?
it totally is. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm gonna follow this. I'm gonna see what these people in this book are up to. And I was very lucky that I had found a mentor in an artist named Jeff Geib out here in Lancaster. And he knew all of this stuff too somehow. And when I showed him this book, his eyes lit up as if like you found it too, and it really felt like he was waiting for someone else to write it because he had cobbled all the same stuff. So he sort of introduced me to like Richard Lack and like that lineage and all these things. And
Yeah. A lot of people were waiting to write that book. Yeah. Or all of them really. Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like it, or it sounds like everyone was just sort of like, well, you do it. No, you do it. No, you do it.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think so. I felt there could have been a lot of people who could have done it. It is a lot of work. Maybe that's why they had other better things to do with their time. Who knows?
Well, I was thinking it is such a massive undertaking, not only from a curatorial standpoint, from a curricular standpoint, the way it's all laid out, and then on top of all of that skill you have, you also have to be a great writer. Have you always written?
It's an interesting question because yeah, there's multifaceted like things that have gone into the book. One is I wonder if I could put a number on the amount of images I've looked at, like
Yeah.
so many, and then to pull them together into a collection. And then I think in all the books, there's like Easter eggs or whatever you'd call it, where things relate to other things that are kind of inside jokes, because by the end, you know these things and you kind of play with it. There's the design aspect, every single page there was no book designed like that before I made that book. So I hired, for all my books, I've hired my own designers and did them and then handed it, and then they're redesigned in-house. But I sat with somebody every single page on every single book. But I think that the writing of it, I never went to college, so I never took a writing class. And so the writing of it was hard, and I rewrote it a bunch of times, or maybe many, many times. And that was scary. It was scary to do it. But what I've leaned on in terms of the writing is that perhaps more than drawing or painting, well, I've always loved it, but I'm a lifelong reader, and I know what I like when I read it. So for me, the way I test my writing is I read it back to myself, and if I think it sucks, I just keep working on it. But it's like a painting, because you get so close to it by the end. And what would be an ideal world is you'd write the thing, and then you would have, sit in a drawer for a month or two, and then you give it another pass, and then it's done. But what happens is, by the end, you're like, you've got 10 minutes, 9, 8, 5, 6, 7, you're done. It's like, well, wait. And then the minute you see it printed, you're like, damn it. I didn't mean to, Yeah, so there's an element of that. But thank you for saying about the writing. Is this a labor of love, like sincerely. And it's given me a huge appreciation for I feel like I know writers as artists now from writing, and I'm realizing the visual artists and writers are the same person using different media, but it's the exact same thing.
That's really cool. Yeah, I guess that makes me wonder, has your approach to visual composition changed after the written composition? Because you've written a number of books now, a lot of beautiful blog posts, and I mean it just seems to really flow. And so has that influence gone both ways?
Actually, I feel like your question is causing some things to mentally unlock, and so I probably need to sit with it, but not exactly. I would say that in some ways I rely on writing for teaching, like principles of writing with teaching and aesthetics, and there's certain number of things that dovetail one another. Let's see how to like describe it. I guess like a certain parallel would be, you're a teacher, and so when you've got like a beginning student coming in, and let's say it's someone who isn't already well trained off of a million YouTube videos or wherever they're coming from, but someone kind of naively drawing, they tend to function in terms of pictographs. I just want this to look like what it's supposed to be. And so they'll kind of go straight for it in a way that's not particularly helpful. And beginning drawing is really a dismantling of those word pictures and enabling you to see what's really there. and how that might dovetail if we draw a correlation with writing is that words are pictographs in a way. They're symbolic representations of complex realities that are themselves a shortcut. And so when you start speaking or when you start writing, the temptation is to go for what you've heard said before or something that you think might sound halfway decent to somebody else. But what you're trying to do is, in a way, dismantle and come up with something, fresh would not be the word, but authentic for what you actually feel and what you actually see. And so in order to do that, you really have to think about things and break it down. So in that way, and like a million other ways, you're trying to connect the thoughts of the writer with the thoughts of the reader, the thoughts of the draftsman with the person standing in front of a drawing who's been staring at images on Instagram and everywhere all day. How do you cut through? All, and so in that way, it's kind of similar.
Yeah, that's amazing. I hadn't quite thought of it in those terms before. That idea of like when I'm in the studio right now, my biggest goal is to be amazed by the surprises. Like, what am I going to discover that I haven't seen before or I never would have noticed before? And just try to get out of autopilot from like, this is the block in, this is how I turn form, this is how I stage a still life, like all of that. And it's those surprises that begin to sort of draw out the authentic and make my work start to feel like mine. And it sounds like you're really trying to discover the same thing within your writing.
Yeah, I think so. And the same kind of frustration of like, oh God, the challenges of putting all that and making it work out the way you want to. And if you think like what you're saying about now you're trying to make block in and now you're trying to turn form. So if you think when you're a student, what a revelation all that stuff is, it's like, yes, finally the block in. Now I can get, really anyone can begin to see things in a fresh way if they start breaking it down away from words and into just seeing, angle directions. But in the very way that those things become these sort of liberating moments to kind of free you up to see something as it is, it then shuts down like its own kind of prison at a certain point when you get the muscle memory. And so what you're describing is almost coming full circle, like, yes, you worked so hard to get there. Now, how can you attain that level of mastery where you do not for 1 minute think about that? And an especially difficult problem for you as a teacher because you're still reinforcing that through, every time you walk into a studio and you see a student whose drawing is kind of botched because they never did a good block in. So, you're like,
Totally. It's a really sharp double-edged blade there. And it's really fun to navigate that. And a lot of my personal practice has been in my sketchbook for that reason, where I have that sense of play like guaranteed, you know?
yeah.
And so I can just work and work and try different techniques and different ideas, and it's just been wonderful. But it's all trying to get out of my own habit, right? Trying to get out of that immediate process that I've worked so hard to get, but now maybe it's a little too much like breathing sometimes.
Yeah, I wonder if like what you're kind of saying or have alluded to is that sort of surprise of when you come up against something where you're really seeing it in such a powerful way that it really cuts through. And I'm just curious, we're talking a bit about process of art. It seems like, the way that artists are creating work for the way that artists are expected to market themselves today kind of feeds that repetition of just making content. And what you're kind of describing is, enjoying something for the act of making it, the learning or the surprise. So could you like elaborate on that a little more, because I find that really interesting.
Totally. And it's the kind of thing like what feeds your soul, you know? And I feel like that hustle of creating content is about paying your rent and finding, some external idea or quantification of success, right? I've made the thing, people like it. I'm going to keep making the thing that people like, and this is me now. And that always to me felt like the worst type of relationship with a gallery. Like where you made something with joy and then all of a sudden you're locked into it for the next like 20 years, right? So you've written so many books at this point. Your second round of books, I almost think of them in like rounds.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
Okay, cool, awesome. Your second round is a revisit of drawing and painting because your first round had drawing and painting. I almost saw it once again to liken it to a studio practice, like you're returning to the same subject, having done the first one and carrying it into the next one. And there's a lot of overlap, but there's a lot of subtle differences that I think are really powerful. What was that experience like going for round two?
Yeah, during the first two books, I actually didn't believe, I was actually almost philosophically against the idea that you could or should learn art from a book. So my motivation for doing it was kind of creating a paper trail or record of this in as big a way as I could. And I specifically tried to stay away from anything super hands-on in terms of like how two element is really condensed in it. And with the second two books, I wanted a completely different feeling to it. So I hired a photographer. I wanted you to feel like you were in a studio. Initially, I was really like a purist. The best way to spend your time is in the studio, in a studio of some kind, learning directly from a person, small group of people there. And with the second one, I wanted to catalog what it felt like in the atelier, in the studio. And it came about almost at the same time that you saw these great cookbooks coming out where you would see, Ottolenghi's book and it would be covered in flour and you would feel yourself, you could kind of imagine yourself taken in to this group, and it was this little like community of people trying to do things by hand. So I actually just bought like a truckload of different cookbooks and was like, how do they show that feeling of being there? Never taste something by looking at a picture, but how can we almost taste it? And so hired a photographer and got tons of like studio shots. And I thought the photography was really beautiful. And then I went in and it was a lot more explicit. The technical stuff was more explicit and kind of spelled out. And that was the first time I really pulled out essays. I've always been deeply moved by essays, like 19th century essays in particular. So I both like pulled out the technical teaching part of it and I pulled out more the philosophy part of it and kind of had both floating. And then there's kind of nods in there like, I think I have 10 different husband-wife teams in the book. Like if you go through,
Yeah.
that is like fun, like kind of a fun back thing. But a lot of this stuff was real design issues, real design problems. For the first book, for that second group, the first one was drawing, and I hired a student for that one to do all the illustrations by hand, pen and ink. So that one I would say, so when I think of like photography and cookbook stuff, I'm really thinking of the lessons in classical painting, lessons in classical drawing, all the illustrations that are so perfect. She kind of broke the system a little bit because it's so perfect. It looks like it could have been done by computer. All of them were done by hand in the style of a 19th century American drawing book. And
That's
so
amazing.
that's so all those things are like nods to it. And with both those books, a lot of the examples, came from students working in the program, all those books. And so,
Yeah, I mean that's fantastic. That brings up such an interesting thing because there's a lot of older drawing texts, like a lot, and they're illustrated pretty well. Are they have a lot of rich description of what's going on, right? Um, but when you go back and you start looking at like all the older painting manuals and everything, it's more theoretical, it's less concrete. And also, what are the modern painting how-to books outside of yours and Richard Schmidt?
yeah, they've since I've done the ones with, well, now it's been bought by Monticelli, but with Watson Guptill initially, all those designs, they went on to do book after book using that same kind of template. They haven't with the last two, and with the new one, I'm curious to see if that will end up being used, because all of them are a conundrum. But now it feels like there's more books than there is life. There's more content than there is life, you know? So that's an interesting thing. And, you have galleries. I mean, we're in an interesting time because the role of art has really shifted. The role of galleries have shifted. So you almost see artists kind of in a certain way, but work created as content for social media is very different than work created for a gallery, which would almost be more like an album, like music created for an album versus streaming, where you're thinking in terms of a body of work and you're thinking in terms of a particular kind of longevity. So if you go back a generation, like if you look at like the old Art Students League instructors or any of those guys, and you would look at their studio practices or what they were trying to do, it would almost be embarrassing for a person of our time, because the sincerity, how they viewed their calling was so sincere and the calling was so high that the sincerity itself would be looked at as very uncool, in today's culture. And that is a small indication of how much things have changed. Like, can you try for something pretty profound? Is there a place for that anymore? Yeah, well, that's kind of its own tangent. So
Yeah, but it's a tangent worth taking, I think, because yeah, that idea of like what is sincerity, and it could be found in technique or practice, like that's an extension of it, right? But I think there's something deeper. It sort of lies in your personal artistic philosophy and how you choose to pursue your creative interests, right? Um, and kind of makes me think of the book you have coming up. Is that kind of the direction that you were looking to go?
well, we're in an age of authenticity, but that's kind of different than like, which is a really admirable quality. Like if you look at the role of art in terms of like, you know, cultural movements in terms of advertising, or like what's attractive in terms of marketplace stuff, and then you look at like artistic countercultural movement, kind of against that, and there's a whole lot of pendulum swinging there. But if you look at somebody like Frank Mason or somebody else, I was listening to a podcast of one of his students, and I reminded me of going to visit his studio, and it's up, stairs in Little Italy, and he had this enormous, almost like altarpiece type art that would just span the sides of a wall. Well, are you going to be creating monumental art knowing, or commissioning monumental art knowing that architecture no longer makes room for any kind of art whatsoever? It's glass and materials. Like we're thankfully moving towards at least a little bit of interest in stone and wood and things that feel like real materials. But you'll notice there's no room for art. So here you are in your little thing creating some kind of high altar piece for a church that will never ever show it, because everyone's like worshiping in their basement with electric guitar. You know what I mean? So I'm just saying, like,
Sure.
what happened? What happened to these like grand achievements? And it's a thing that ties into literature as well, because are you just left with the ironic? Are you left with the purely sexual? What still has a place in terms of, the meaning, as far as that goes. But the new book, thank you for asking. This, I just got the first copy yesterday. I'm super
Wow.
This is it. So these are essays, and yes, deep dive into very uncool sincerity. All essays, no technique.
That's amazing. Wow, that's so cool. It looks great. I was seeing it on the website that you had sent me, and I pre-ordered it. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Um, it comes out, was it April?
Yeah, April.
That's fantastic.
Thanks.
Um, yeah, I think it's the perfect time for a book like that, because you had mentioned that it just seems like there's book after book after book, And one of the things that you alluded to that I did notice is they are all starting to look a little bit alike.
Yeah.
They all have the same type of column. They all have the same, here's the materials. They all,
Yep.
and they're all really well done.
Beautiful.
Um, and really beautiful. But I am noticing it's starting to feel like you're collecting personalities when you buy the book instead of the information. Um, and yeah, with YouTube, with all the art tutorials out there, and there's a lot of here's how to do it, and not a lot of why you might want to or what you might think about.
Yeah. I think when I was a student, it was so hard to get the information that, we already touched on it, that you're not going to end up there by accident. You're not going to just find yourself there. You had to really want it. And so you've already done a lot of thinking. Now it's possible to get very good and never given it more than, not expose yourself to a lot of great art or understand why people might make it. And that becomes very, very important going forward, because images, we're in a totally different era right now. We are flooded with images. If you would go back to early 20th century, like the year 1900, and go look at Times Square, what would you see? You're not going to see a lot of images. You're going to see a lot of text. Fast forward 100 years plus, and you're super saturated, and we're dopamine, looking for the dopamine hit. And so we're not standing in front of a work of art. You may have reached adulthood at this point without even knowing that there's some kind of visual reward to being in front of something for a very long time. So in that case, you're now up against, from here on out, AI generated images forever. And it's more images in one day than any person from the past would have had in a lifetime. And so in that case, why are you doing it? People aren't collecting it. Architecture, public art isn't, it's not going into this way we see ourselves as a community, because communities are more and more and more alike. And so the artist, the role of the artist going forward is, not to diminish the role of technique, because it's inseparable from our embodied form. We are embodied beings ultimately, and that's our weakness and that's our power. And so to be in the studio slowly creating is absolutely essential. But knowing why you're creating and investing in yourself as a thinker and a feeler and a person who's not just mirroring back what's already out there, how do you get in front of it, comes from, if we knock on you, are you hollow, or is there something happening in there? So
Yeah.
that's what, like, the motivation behind the book. There's a whole lot of motivations behind the book. But one I would say is that I feel like the role of the artist going forward is the artist is in themselves a preserver of the human. And that might sound like a glib saying, but within the artist, if, they're learning things slowly by hand, and they're thinking and they're feeling that, is that going to, it's almost like the end of Fahrenheit, 451. The books are gone, but the people who know the books remain. In some way, that is the artist, is a record of that kind of person.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I'm a little scared by that, but I love that too, you know? I think that's fantastic. Yeah.
It's happened in history before, in the monks
Yeah.
that, would preserve these, squirrel away these books and try to protect them from being lost. And sometimes, they're down to the last copy that exists anywhere in the world. And, that's what sparked the Renaissance, or one of the things that sparked the Renaissance was this manuscript hunters going in and resurrecting, like, the last remaining work of Epictetus or somebody. And then there it is, and now it's alive, but it had to go underground. But that happens with, the arc of civilizations are constantly shifting in that way. And yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Um, yeah, I feel that connection with humanity when I'm walking through like the Met, you know. I used to only stop in front of like I used to call them my friends, you know, like I'm gonna go visit Rembrandt, Velasquez, you know, like and do my usual lap. And then I realized I have access to one of the most amazing museums in the world, and I'm only looking at the same things every time. And so I just sort of would wander and I would discover these items that just seemed so alien to me, but were made so beautifully and with care. And you know, you walk into a room where this one thing that caught your eye turns out there's, you know, 50 of them, and it's just astounding. It's just this these rooms turn into vessels of effort and meaning of a time that I just can't imagine, and I love that so much.
Yeah, they're really a capsule of sometimes whole civilization. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you read Philippe de Montebello's book, Conversations on Art, where he talks about his favorite piece in all of the Met. Can you imagine being the director of the Met and fantasizing about your one piece? Do you know which one it is? Can you think of which one? Like, which one would you, if you could like run, the Met's going to be bombed by the Nazis, and now you got one piece and you could save it.
What's so funny is when I was in grad school at the New York Academy of Art, my friend David and I would go to the Met almost every week. And, you know, because you wouldn't have to pay. And I was like, this is the greatest thing about being in school in New York is you get to just go to the Met for free whenever you want.
Absolutely.
And we used to ask one another that if you could save one piece from this fire, what would that be? And mine would change, but not too often. It was usually Rembrandt's self-portrait. There's something magical about it. The more I look at it, the more I think I understand, the better it gets. And it's not because I do understand it. It just gets richer and richer and richer.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a relationship for sure. Yeah.
Do you have any art like that that you seek out?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You get pulled, this gravitational pull to the pieces that we love. So, yeah, so Philippe loved that yellow jasper lips in the Egyptian section. And so I went and spent some time with that because until I read it, I thought, what? I've been in the Met a million times and I couldn't pick that out. And it was amazing that here he could have had access to anything, and it's this fragment of just this perfect, mystery of this little uh, sculpture, and so I think that ties to some degree with he in one of his other essays he talks about the first piece of art that grabbed him as a little boy, and I think he had this crush on this sculpture, and it was in France as a little boy that he saw this face and his beautiful angelic face. And I wonder if our childhood taste, or there's something that goes back to being a kid that gets triggered in terms of our art, our loves, So
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I pursued art instead of becoming a computer programmer, because I also love that. Turns out my brother went that way. Um, I just always had a love of drawing, and I'm sure you were the same way, where everyone said like, "You're the art kid," you know, like you do all the drawings for us, you know. And I just I think once I was labeled that, it just became a part of my identity, and it seemed cool. I was like, "Yeah, I can do something that other people don't. That's kind of nice." And like I wasn't good, but it was fun. It was really fun, and pursuing that just felt like a natural extension of who I already kind of thought I was. Were you sort of the same way? I remember you saying that you had struggled to build your technique and, you know, find that way, that you had no natural ability, which I don't buy into very much, but
I was definitely the art kid in for a whole bunch of different ways. One, yes, I was drawing all the time and not doing any of the work I was supposed to be doing.
yeah, same.
I could say I had zero aptitude for any other subject, but maybe it was, I wonder if that was true, but I definitely still see that. I had felt no access to a whole lot of the subjects. And I'm realizing as an adult, like if you put me in a class, I think I learned differently than a person who's a great test taker. I'm not a great test taker. I'm not a good listener if I'm getting information that's not hitting. I have to understand the why of it, or I just refuse, like absolutely refuse to take one step further. And I think that's more the problem in terms of. So anyway, I was like gonna shave my head and wear black every day and be the art kid. So I really leaned into that very hard.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, the that idea of I need to understand why,
I have
right?
to
I
why.
have to. And I feel the same way. And I think that's why I struggled so much with my undergraduate art history, because there are all these giant surveys and they're throwing all this information at you where you just have to parrot it back. And I would say, well, yeah, but why do I need to know these 10 sculptures where you can't tell me who made them? You know, like, and
And there is reasons why, but yeah, but if someone can't articulate it, you're like, yes, you want me to follow you where? Like, why should I follow you? And
right.
yeah, my knowledge of mathematics stopped when I was learning algebra, and they're like, here's the number line and it's 0 to 1,000,000. Like, let's draw this out, little ticky things. And here's the negative numbers. I'm like,
Yeah.
negative numbers? Why? They're like, I don't know. I'm like, that's it. I'm done. I'm out of here. So now I'm hurting nobody but myself with that. With that attitude, nobody was hurt but me.
Yeah. I love the math example because I really think that that's it. One of my favorite pedagogical texts is actually The Mathematician's Lament, by Paul Lockhart. He's
Oh,
a mathematician in Brooklyn, and the whole essay is him railing against how poorly math is actually taught.
yeah, I should write that down. Okay, I'll remember it when we're done.
I'll send you a copy. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's great.
it's for exactly the same reason that you just laid out. It's instead of asking students to just parrot it back or just accept, like he advocates for saying, this is why it's happening. What problems do you find interesting? What do you want to solve? What's fun? How can we play?
Yeah, because mathematicians, like others in the arts, are often motivated by beauty, and you would never know it.
Totally. Well, most of the time I found out because my brother's also trained in mathematics, and so I get to talk to this amazing mind all the time. But I didn't realize just how amazing and intuitive and creative and improvisational actual mathematics is, and that I wasn't doing any real math at all.
And every subject, physics and science, we're all in a certain way trying to do the same thing, which is ask questions, throw new light on things, allow other people to see things in a new way, to experience a kind of beauty, find a kind of meaning. So if you have that kind of conversation, then it breaks the fields wide open.
Totally. And with you writing such grand, scope books, because the books that you're writing, they are focused, but as you said, you chose to include a lot of folks that are on the peripheries or could be signposts for different components of representational figurative work done at a very high level, with great purpose. And it kind of got me thinking, how has your thought on your practice changed by taking such a long view of things? Like when you go back into your studio with a more local view, what does that look like? How has that changed these past, I don't know, what, 20 years?
Yeah, I feel like I have outstanding taste. Like, I feel like I have really, really good taste, except for with my own work. I feel like I have no ability until it's done. You're like, why did you do that? You know better than to do that. And so I don't know, that's a little bit of a curse, I would say. Like,
I love that. I feel the exact same way. I'm in the classroom, I'm rocking a lecture, I'm helping all the students. I go in my studio and I'm like, what the hell is this? All right, that's really good. I feel good it's not just me.
yeah, so I'm sure there's many people that don't experience that particular lament. However, I feel it keenly.
Yeah, totally. If you're enjoying the podcast and you want maybe a little bit more, please check out my online community, The Virtual Studio. You can find all of our podcast episodes, including behind the scenes and virtual member exclusive episodes. The one I just recorded was about building a still life, specifically for the Still Life Club image reference set that I just released for March. It's a lot of fun. A lot of times, artists don't really get taught how to build a still life or what goes into our thinking when it comes to making a still life. It was a lot of fun to break that down. So if you want to keep the conversation going, if you want to become a part of the conversation, ask our guests questions, give me suggestions of what you want to listen to, please show up, join the Virtual Studio online community. There will be a link in the show notes. Totally.
So, yeah, well, thank you for having me for the conversation. It's really, really fun.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I appreciate your time. Um, I have a couple of questions I ask at the end of the conversation, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, One of them is, it's one of my favorite difficult questions, and it's, what was the hardest thing for you to unlearn?
The hardest thing for me, I would say, maybe there's like a couple different things. I think I have mental patterns that I developed as a child that are very, very hard for me to separate from. I think one would be that excellence is more important than learning or a process. I struggle with that. I struggle to be okay in, when the painting isn't going well, the writing, like I have to continually unlearn a product oriented mindset towards art, I think would be one. I'd say that would be one thing.
That's fantastic. Has being a teacher helped with that?
I can be very kind to other people, and it doesn't always extend back. I also think another thing that I struggle with is I go too fast. My time, especially as I get older, gets feels more precious, or maybe life has sped up, or maybe a combination of all of the above. And so, in a way, I continually have to remind myself that it's okay to go, stop the clock, shut the door, let something take as long as it's going to take. And that's a hard lesson to learn. If I could live in that state all the time, I'd be very proud of myself.
Yeah, that's got to be a tricky thing, especially in the landscape that artists like ourselves find ourselves in now, where it's social media driven and trying to reach out to people where it does feel like there's this deadline, but it's not real.
It's an algorithm, it's a deadline set by an algorithm. And so you're feeding that, not necessarily what's in the best interest of the art, or people in general. So yeah, I'd say those things.
Yeah, it's amazing. What are two wholehearted recommendations that you could share? Could be a film, book, artworks, anything that you're just like, this is it.
Oh, that's so good. So I'm an avid consumer of so many things, like with music and reading and seeing art and all that stuff. So I'll give a couple book picks. However, there might be something more important to be said about it. But the problem with that is that, I follow up with people's reading lists. Like, I'll listen to a lecture and someone says, oh, this book changed my life, and I'll go get it. I'll be like, well, it's not changing my life. Like, there's nothing about this. I'm trying to see in it what you saw in it, and I can't. I can't see it at all. Um, so that's why probably not super useful to give my favorite books, but I would say that a couple, I guess, a book like art as therapy would be useful, Alain de Botton, and only in so much as if you've never thought about does art have a role today, he starts asking questions like why should an average person look at art? Or if you want to follow along that line, like Art and Techniques by Lewis Mumford hits on the media ecology aspect of art and technology, which is, I find, like, I eat books. I love books. And so, like, you're underlining a lot of it. Or maybe my best pick for, like, an artist, like, reading a journal like Delacroix's journals, where it breaks open the art history. He's not just a guy in a museum. He's got a beating heart, and his struggles are our struggles. But I'd say my wholehearted recommendation would be turn off the news and try to limit. I would say before you even pick up anything, try to do a digital detox of some kind or other, because you're not even going to be in the right headspace to see something in a fresh way if your heart is tied into some kind of emergency narrative, which is continually being generated in the times we're living in right now. So do yourself a favor and turn it off, whatever it is. So.
That's fantastic. I love that your answer is, I'll give you something, but I'm also going to take something. Yeah, that's really wonderful. That's so cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I do want to double down and say that your book, The Inner Life of the Artist, Conversations from the Atelier, it comes out in April.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. I cannot wait for that book. It looks really, really wonderful.
I hope you like it. And if you're ever in Seattle, do not come without hanging out with me. So.
Perfect.
Well,
thanks so much.
Take care.
All right. Thank you so much, Juliette. That was awesome. I loved your answer to what was the hardest thing for you to unlearn. I found that inspiring, and yeah, it's just nice to hear someone echo thoughts that we've all had, right? So thank you so much. Juliette and I didn't have as much time as I've had with the other folks that I'm lucky enough to be able to have conversations with. She was very, very accommodating with her schedule, and I want to make sure that I showcase all the amazing things that she's been up to, which is a lot. She has a lot going on. Definitely check out the show notes for a complete list of links for all the things coming up that she's doing. There's an exhibition. There's the book, obviously, The Inner Life of the Artist, Conversations from the Atelier. That comes out April 9th, but you can pre-order it now, just like I have. And she has a really robust online program. So she has an online atelier, and I would actually like to just take a minute and show you that website. So if you're on YouTube, you're going to get to see it. If you're listening to the audio version, I think you're going to want to head to our show notes at some point and follow that link so you can check out all the amazing stuff that's there. So this is the Aristides Atelier. The web address will be in our show notes. Having made websites now for years and starting up my own website project, the Open Sketchbook, I know that this is a labor of love, and whoever is working with them on their team is doing a fantastic job. So here you can see some of the instructors. We have Juliette Aristides, Joshua Langstaff, Justin Wood. Let's see, Jonathan Hodge, Patricia Watwood, who is amazing. So yeah, there's lots of great things to see here, and the curriculum for the Foundations program sounds really fun. I'm not going to spend too much time here, because I'm looking at a website on a potential audio recording, and how exciting is that? One of the things I did notice was in all of these lessons, and I really love how this is broken down. I actually have something in the works that's a little bit like this, so great minds, right? But I'm loving all of the nods to art history here, which Juliette is so amazing at. I just want to make quick mention, the lesson 1 block-in image is a silver point drawing by Alphonse Legros. And I love that it's used as a block-in image because it sort of challenges the idea of what a block-in is. And that to me is what makes Juliette's writing so powerful, because it's not only the simple, easy examples, it's showing you the broad scope of what's available if you sort of stretch the concepts a little bit. So yeah, just wanted to take a minute, show you this awesome website, her online school, the Aristides Atelier through Terracotta. Once again, I just want to thank Juliette for being such a gracious guest and for letting us know about her upcoming book and for all the fun recommendations that she shared. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to us on YouTube. If you are on YouTube, but maybe you kind of prefer audio-only versions, the video's not doing it for you, you can find our audio versions anywhere you can get your podcasts. So like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, all that stuff. If you feel compelled to give us a review, please do. That actually really help us out. If you're on YouTube and you're watching the video and you made it this far, please, if you could like and subscribe, it actually really does help. Like more than I would like to admit that it does. So you would be doing me a really big favor. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening, and be on the lookout for an episode next week. Take care.